Emily and I had been married for 12 years. People used to call us the perfect couple, and for a long time, I believed it. We had our routines. Saturday mornings spent walking through the farmer's market, evenings binge-watching our favorite shows, and Sundays dedicated to cooking meals for the week. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. Solid. Dependable. At least, that's what I thought. The first time I noticed something off, it was subtle. She started keeping her phone on silent, even when we were home alone. Before, she'd leave it lying around without a second thought. Now it seemed glued to her hand. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone's got work emails these days, I reasoned. But then there were the late-night texts, her face lighting up with a smile she didn't share with me. "Who's that?" I asked one night, trying to sound casual. "Just work stuff," she replied quickly, slipping the phone into her pocket as if I'd caught her red-handed. I tried to shrug it off, but little things started piling up. She'd go out for girls' nights more often than usual, always last minute. When I asked who she was meeting, the names would change. Sophie, Amanda, sometimes someone I didn't know. She'd come back late, sometimes smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I didn't say anything because, what would I even say? "You smell different?" I would sound crazy. The real kicker came one evening after dinner. I asked a simple question. "How was your day?" The way she looked at me, you'd think I'd accused her of a crime. Her fork clattered onto her plate. "Why do you always interrogate me, Lucas?" she snapped. "Can't I just have a moment to myself without a million questions?" Her tone was so sharp it took me a second to process. I wasn't interrogating her. I was trying to have a normal conversation, something that used to come easily between us. The anger in her voice felt like a slap in the face, and the worst part was, I could tell she didn't care. I let it slide that night, convincing myself she was just stressed. But the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I started noticing more changes. She stopped meeting my eyes during conversations, and her laughter, the genuine kind, the one I fell in love with, became rare. Our shared routines felt strained, as if she was just going through the motions. Then there were the nights she'd say she was working late, only to come home hours after the office would have closed. When I asked about it, her answers were vague. Deadlines, she'd say, or a project came up last minute. The excuses were always hurried, like she hadn't put much thought into them. Deep down, I didn't buy it. But what could I do? Accuse her without proof? I wasn't about to become the husband who demanded to see her phone or grilled her about her every move. That wasn't me. Still, the distance between us was undeniable. The warmth that once filled our home felt replaced by something cold and uninviting. I'd sit across from her at dinner, watching her scroll through her phone or stare blankly into space, wondering what was going on in her head. One night, she announced she was heading out with the girls again. Her outfit caught my attention. Not that she wasn't allowed to dress up, but she looked different. A little too put together for a casual outing. The dress was one I hadn't seen before, and her makeup was done meticulously, like she was going on a first date. "You look nice," I said, hoping it came off as a compliment and not the suspicion I felt bubbling up. "Thanks," she replied, not meeting my eyes as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. It was such a small moment, but it gnawed at me long after she left. I sat on the couch that night, flipping through channels without watching anything, waiting for the sound of her car in the driveway. When she finally came home, it was almost midnight. She barely said a word before heading upstairs. The faint smell of cologne lingered as she passed me, and for the first time, I couldn't ignore it. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the life we'd built together was already slipping through my fingers. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was overthinking, misreading her behavior. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to face it yet. A few weeks after Emily's behavior started shifting, the little inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just her attitude or the phone anymore. It was the way she started treating me, as if I was in the way, a roadblock to her plans instead of her partner. She still managed to play her part in front of friends and family, smiling at gatherings and squeezing my hand like nothing was wrong. But when it was just the two of us, the distance between us felt like a canyon. One Friday night, she announced she was heading out again for another one of Herb Girls' nights. By then, I was already suspicious, but I kept it to myself. Instead, I nodded, plastering on a smile. Have fun, I said, trying to sound casual, though I could hear the strain in my voice. She hesitated at the door, fiddling with her keys. Don't wait up, okay? It might be late. Her words landed harder than they should have. I had no reason to doubt her yet, at least no solid proof, but something about her tone felt rehearsed. Forced. It wasn't like her to say something like that. That night, I tried to distract myself. I ordered takeout and watched a movie, but my mind kept wandering back to Emily. Where was she? Who was she with? Was I just being paranoid? I hated how much space these questions took up in my head, but I couldn't push them away. When I finally heard her car pull into the driveway, it was close to 1 a.m. I stayed on the couch, pretending to be asleep, hoping to catch a glimpse of her demeanor. The door opened quietly, and her heels clicked softly against the floor. She was trying not to wake me, which only made my stomach churn more. As she walked past the couch, the smell of cologne, faint but distinct, hit me again. I waited a few minutes before heading upstairs. She was already in bed, facing the wall, her back to me. I climbed in beside her, careful not to make a sound. As I lay there, staring into the darkness, I couldn't stop the thoughts from spiraling. What was she hiding? Who was she with? And why did I feel like the person lying next to me was a stranger? The next morning, over coffee, I decided to test the waters. How was your night? I asked, keeping my tone light. It was fine, she replied without looking up from her phone. Nothing special. Her answer was short, clipped. She didn't even bother to elaborate. That wasn't like her. Emily loved to talk, about her friends, her work, even the mundane details of her day. But now, she gave me nothing. Just silence. Later that week, I noticed something else. She was getting ready for another outing, standing in front of the mirror, applying makeup with more care than usual. Another girl's night? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, she said, avoiding my reflection in the mirror. Just a few drinks. Nothing crazy. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You've been going out a lot lately. Everything okay? Her hand froze mid-brush. She looked at me through the mirror, her expression unreadable. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged. Nothing. Just. You've been busy. She turned to face me then, her eyes narrowing. If you're trying to say something, just say it, Lucas. Her defensiveness caught me off guard. I'm not saying anything, I said quickly, raising my hands in surrender. I just miss spending time with you, that's all. Her features softened slightly, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she gave me a quick peck on the cheek and said, We'll have a date night soon. I promise. But that promise never came. Another week passed, and her outings continued. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it without meaning to, and a name I didn't recognize flashed across the screen. Daniel. The message preview read, Can't wait to see you tonight, winking face. My heart sank. I wanted to believe it was harmless. Maybe a coworker or a friend I didn't know. But the tone of the message made my chest tighten. This wasn't normal. I didn't touch the phone. Instead, I walked out of the room and paced the hallway, my mind racing. Who was Daniel? And what did he mean by see you tonight? My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and dread. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part of me hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I made a scene over nothing? When she stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, I forced a smile. You heading out again tonight? I asked, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Yeah, she said, avoiding my gaze. Just for a bit. And with that, she was gone again, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that something was very, very wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. The name Daniel echoed in my mind, looping endlessly like a bad song. By morning, I was still debating whether to confront Emily, but every time I imagined how that conversation might go, I froze. What if I was wrong? What if I wasn't? Either way, the ground beneath me felt unsteady. A week later, I decided I couldn't live in the dark anymore. Emily's behavior hadn't improved. In fact, it seemed to be getting worse. She'd come home late, offer hollow excuses, and bury herself in her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. That Friday, she announced another girls' night. Her tone was so casual, almost dismissive, like I wouldn't dare question it. "Don't wait up," she said with a wave as she grabbed her purse and headed out. I watched her leave, then waited an hour before I made my move. Her phone was locked, of course, but over the years, I'd seen her type the passcode enough times to remember it. My hands trembled as I entered it, the screen lighting up with her messages. There it was. Daniel. His name sat near the top of her conversations, and my chest tightened as I opened the thread. The messages weren't just flirty, they were blatant. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." Another read, "Next time, let's make it a whole weekend." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The air left my lungs, and for a moment, I couldn't even move. My hands gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. I scrolled further, each message hitting harder than the last. "You looked stunning today. Wish I could have kissed you goodbye. I miss you already." The timestamps were recent, some from just hours ago. My heart raced as anger and disbelief tangled together, choking me. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream, to break something. Instead, I forced myself to keep reading. One message in particular made my blood run cold. "We're still on for tonight, right? Can't wait to see you in that dress I love." I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the phone still clutched in my hand. My mind raced. This wasn't just casual flirting. This was planned, intentional. She wasn't working late or out with friends. She was with him. For a moment, I considered calling her right then and there, demanding answers. But something stopped me. I realized I needed more than just texts. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't twist or explain away. I couldn't let her turn this around on me, couldn't let her call me paranoid or controlling. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. The next day, I reached out to Ian, a contact I'd been given by a friend who'd gone through a messy divorce. Ian specialized in uncovering the kind of truths people tried to hide. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady even as the shame of it all threatened to swallow me whole. What kind of man has to hire someone to find out if his wife is cheating? But Ian didn't judge. He just asked for details, where Emily went, what her routine looked like, anything that might help him track her movements. Over the next week, Ian followed Emily. He kept me updated with short matter-of-fact texts. Left work at 7:15 p.m. Met with a man at the Gilded Lily. Checked into a room at the Glenmont Boutique Hotel. Every message was another knife to the gut. By the time Ian sent photos, I wasn't sure I could handle seeing them. But I opened them anyway. There she was, standing outside the hotel, her hand brushing against a man's arm as they laughed together. His face wasn't entirely visible in the shot, but it didn't matter. I could see enough. Another photo showed them walking inside, Emily holding his hand. And then the last one, her stepping into a hotel room with him, the door closing behind them. I stared at those photos for what felt like hours, the world blurring around me. There was no mistaking what I was seeing. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an innocent coincidence. Emily was cheating, and she didn't even seem to be trying to hide it. That night, when she came home, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. She climbed into bed without a word, as if nothing had happened, and I lay awake beside her, the weight of the truth pressing down on me like a boulder. My mind was a storm of questions. How long had this been going on? Did she love him? Was it just physical or something more? Most of all, I wondered how she could look me in the eye and lie so easily. The morning after receiving Ian's final report, I felt like I was sleepwalking. My body moved on autopilot, making coffee, brushing my teeth, but my mind was stuck on a loop, replaying the damning images of Emily with Daniel. By the time she came downstairs, looking radiant and refreshed, it took everything in me to keep from exploding. "Morning," she said casually, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her voice was so light, so normal, that it felt almost mocking. How could she stand there, acting like nothing was wrong? I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I decided the night before that I wasn't going to confront her until I was fully prepared. I needed to keep my emotions in check, no matter how badly I wanted answers. But seeing her there, so calm, so unbothered, it nearly broke my resolve. She kissed me on the cheek as she headed out the door, mumbling something about errands. I watched her leave, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Once she was gone, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. The photos Ian had sent were still open, staring back at me like a cruel taunt. By evening, I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to confront her, to make her admit what she'd done. When she came home, I was waiting in the living room, the photos and text messages printed out and sitting in a neat stack on the coffee table. She walked in, pausing when she saw me sitting there. "What's with the serious face?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "Sit down, Emily," I said, my voice steady but cold. Her smile faltered. "What's going on?" "Sit down." I pointed to the chair across from me. The weight of my tone must have reached her because she sat without another word, her eyes darting nervously toward the stack of papers. I didn't waste time. I slid the pile across the table to her, leaning back in my chair as I watched her face. At first, she looked confused, but as she flipped through the photos, her expression shifted. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hands trembled as she set the papers down. "Who is Daniel?" I asked, my voice low and sharp. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her mind racing for an escape. He's just a friend," she stammered, her voice weak and unconvincing. "A friend?" I repeated, leaning forward. "Because it doesn't look like just a friend in these pictures. Or in those texts. Should I read them out loud for you? Last night was amazing. How about this one? Can't wait to see you in that dress. Sound familiar? Lucas, please, let me explain." "Explain?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around behind my back for God knows how long? That you've been lying to me every time you left this house? What is there to explain, Emily?" Tears filled her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "What does that even mean? Was there a good way for this to happen?" She didn't answer. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Normally, seeing her like this would have broken me. I would have rushed to comfort her, to make everything better. But not this time. This time, her tears felt like manipulation. Another lie in a long string of them. "Stop crying," I said coldly. "You don't get to be the victim here. Not after what you've done." She lifted her head, her eyes red and puffy. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said weakly. It just happened." "It just happened," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. You just accidentally checked into a hotel room with another man. It was all one big misunderstanding." Her tears turned to anger then, her voice rising as she snapped, "You don't understand, Lucas. You don't know what it's like. Feeling ignored, unappreciated. I needed something more, and Daniel—" "Don't you dare blame me for this," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "You're the one who made this choice. You're the one who betrayed me." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick and suffocating. Then, she said something that cut deeper than anything else. "You're so controlling," she spat. "No wonder I had to find happiness elsewhere." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I was too stunned to respond. When I finally found my voice, it was low and deadly. "Happiness?" I said slowly. "You think this is happiness? Sneaking around, lying, destroying everything we built together? If that's what you call happiness, Emily, then you're more pathetic than I thought." She recoiled, her face twisting with a mixture of shame and defiance. "Maybe I am," she said softly, standing up and grabbing her purse. "But I don't have to sit here and listen to this." As she walked away, I didn't try to stop her. I just sat there, staring at the photos on the table, my hands trembling with rage. I'd expected this confrontation to bring some kind of closure, but all it left me with was a hollow ache in my chest and the realization that this was far from over. Emily didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. After our confrontation, I doubted she could face me, or herself. The house felt too quiet, suffocating in its stillness. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying our argument and her last words. No wonder I had to find happiness elsewhere. The next morning, I woke to the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I didn't rush downstairs. I wanted her to make the first move, to feel the weight of what she'd done. Eventually, I heard the creak of the front door and the soft shuffle of her steps. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, where I sat nursing a cup of cold coffee. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. She looked at me like she expected me to say something, but I didn't. I just waited. Finally, she broke the silence. "I stayed with Amanda," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I needed time to think." "To think?" I repeated, my tone as flat as I could manage. "About what? Which excuse to use this time?" Her face flushed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Lucas," she started, her voice trembling, "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But it's not as black and white as you think." I leaned forward, setting my coffee cup on the table. "Oh, it's black and white, Emily. You cheated. You lied. And now you want to sit here and act like there's some gray area where this makes sense." Her hands stilled, and she looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "You don't know how it felt, Lucas. Being in this house. Feeling like a ghost. You were always so distant." "Distant," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I was distant because you made me distant, Emily. You shut me out, you lied to my face, and you expect me to believe this is my fault?" Her tears started again, but I didn't feel any sympathy this time. They felt like a shield, something to hide behind. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "Daniel. He made me feel seen, Lucas. He made me feel alive." Those words hit harder than I thought they would. I stared at her, struggling to keep my composure. "Alive," I repeated, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "You felt alive by destroying our marriage? By turning me into a fool?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice barely audible. I thought I could stop." "But you didn't," I said, my voice cold. "You kept going. You kept lying. And now you want me to what? Forgive you? Pretend this never happened?" She didn't answer. Her silence said more than any words could. "I have to know, Emily," I said after a moment. "Do you love him?" Her head shot up, her eyes wide. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "It wasn't about love. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. You don't accidentally cheat, Emily. You made a choice. Over and over again." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. The touch that once felt comforting now felt foreign. "I want to fix this, Lucas," she said desperately. "I know I messed up, but I still love you." "Love?" I snapped, standing up. "You don't love me, Emily. You love the idea of me. The safe, dependable husband who will always be here no matter what. But you don't get to have that anymore. You don't get to have me." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't give up on us." "Give up?" I said, my voice steady. "You gave up the moment you decided to sleep with him. You gave up on us long before I ever knew there was a problem." The room fell silent, her quiet sobs the only sound. I wanted to feel vindicated, to feel like I'd won some kind of moral victory. But all I felt was exhaustion. I was tired of the lies, the excuses, the constant questioning of everything I thought I knew about her. "I'll stay for now," I said finally, my voice heavy with defeat. "But only for the logistics. We need to figure out how to separate everything. Money, the house, all of it." Her eyes widened in panic. "Separate? Lucas, no, we can't," I interrupted, cutting her off. "It's over, Emily. You killed it. You killed us." I turned and walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me. As I climbed the stairs, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had made a decision. There was no coming back from this, and I wasn't going to waste another second pretending otherwise. The days that followed our confrontation were some of the quietest of my life. Emily and I moved around the house like strangers, barely speaking. When we did, it was short and transactional. Discussions about groceries, bills, or who would clean up after dinner. The rest of the time, we avoided each other like the plague. At first, the silence felt like a reprieve, a chance to collect my thoughts. But as the days stretched into a week, the weight of it became unbearable. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and every glance felt loaded with accusations or regret. It was like living with a ghost, except this ghost wasn't haunting me, she was haunting herself. I spent most of my time focusing on the practicalities. I called a lawyer, explained the situation, and started gathering documents. Bank statements, property records, anything I'd need to protect myself in the divorce. I hadn't told Emily yet, but I knew that conversation was coming. I just wasn't ready to have it. She, on the other hand, seemed to be in some kind of denial. Despite everything, she kept trying to act like we could go back to the way things were. One evening, she even cooked my favorite meal, lasagna, made from scratch. When I came home from work and saw the table set, candles lit, and a bottle of wine waiting, I almost laughed. "What's all this?" I asked, dropping my keys on the counter. She appeared from the kitchen, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, the one she used to wear on our date nights. "I thought we could have dinner together," she said, her voice hopeful but shaky. "Like we used to." I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. "Emily," I said slowly, "what are you doing?" She faltered, her smile fading. "I'm trying, Lucas. I'm trying to show you that I still care." I shook my head, anger bubbling to the surface. "You think lasagna and a dress are going to fix this? That we can just light some candles and pretend everything's fine?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. "This isn't something you can cook your way out of, Emily. You destroyed us. And now you're acting like all it takes to fix it is a nice dinner." She sank into one of the chairs, her hands trembling in her lap. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I can't lose you, Lucas." "You already did," I said, my voice cold. "The moment you chose him over me, you lost me." The dinner remained untouched. I went upstairs, leaving her alone at the table. Later that night, I heard her crying in the guest room. I didn't go to her. I couldn't. By the second week, Emily's attempts at reconciliation shifted from hopeful to desperate. She started leaving notes around the house, on the bathroom mirror, in my briefcase, even taped to the fridge. Each one was some variation of the same message: "I'm sorry. I love you. Please don't give up on us." I threw them all away. Every time I saw her, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. The woman I married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who lied, who cheated, who betrayed me in the worst way possible. I couldn't look at her without feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and something close to pity. Still, I kept my plans quiet. I didn't want her to know how far along I was in preparing for the divorce. Part of me didn't trust her anymore. Not with our finances, our house, or even the truth. I needed to protect myself, and that meant staying one step ahead. Ian, the private investigator, sent me the final batch of evidence. More photos, more details about her meetings with Daniel. One of the pictures showed them sitting at a cafe, her hand resting on his arm as they laughed together. Another showed them walking out of a hotel, their faces relaxed and happy. It was like a punch to the gut, seeing her so at ease with someone else while I was left drowning in the wreckage she created. That night, as I stared at the photos, I made a decision. It was time to tell her. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. "Morning," she said quietly. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, setting the stack of documents I'd been collecting on the table between us. Her eyes flicked to the papers, then back to me, confusion creeping into her expression. "What's this?" she asked. "It's everything we need to start the divorce process," I said simply. Her face paled, and for a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Divorce, she whispered. I nodded, my voice steady. This isn't salvageable, Emily. You know that as well as I do. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. No, Lucas. Please. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just, please don't do this. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You think counseling is going to fix this? That sitting in a room with a stranger is going to erase what you did? I made a mistake, she said, her voice rising. I know that, but I'm still your wife. We can get through this if you just... If I just what, Emily? I interrupted, my voice sharp. If I just pretend it never happened? If I ignore the fact that you lied to me, cheated on me, and made me question everything about our life together? Her tears spilled over, but I didn't stop. This isn't something you can undo, Emily. You don't get to break me and then decide when it's time to put the pieces back together. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped, and she covered her face with her hands. I stood up, grabbing my keys. I'm meeting with the lawyer this afternoon, I said, my voice cold. You should start thinking about what you want out of this. Because I'm done. As I walked out the door, her sobs echoed behind me. I didn't look back. After our confrontation about the divorce, Emily became quieter, almost eerily so. The constant tension in the house was replaced by a heavy silence, one that felt even more suffocating. I'd expected her to argue, to push back or beg, but she seemed almost resigned. Part of me wanted to believe she'd finally accepted the reality of what she'd done, but deep down, I knew better. Emily wasn't the type to go down without a fight. That suspicion was confirmed a few days later. I came home from work to find her sitting at the dining table, a small stack of papers in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, her expression neutral. We need to talk, she said, her tone calm but firm. I sighed, tossing my keys onto the counter. What now, Emily? She slid the papers toward me. This, she said, is what I've been dealing with. Curious but wary, I picked up the papers and started reading. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. There were emails, text message screenshots, and even a notarized statement. All of them painted a picture of Daniel as some sort of predator, someone who had pursued her relentlessly, manipulated her, and coerced her into their affair. I set the papers down, fixing her with a hard stare. What is this supposed to prove? I asked. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. It proves that I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Lucas. He pressured me. I didn't want to hurt you, but he wouldn't leave me alone. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. So now you're the victim? I asked, my tone dripping with disbelief. It's not like that, she insisted. I'm not saying I'm innocent, but I wasn't in control. He made me feel like I didn't have a choice. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was she serious? Did she really think I'd believe this? You expect me to believe that Daniel forced you into this? That all those texts, those meetings, those nights at the hotel, that was all him? Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might crumble. But instead, she straightened her spine and said yes. He made me feel like I couldn't say no, like I had to go along with it. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Unbelievable, I muttered. You're really going to sit here and rewrite history to make yourself the victim? Her face hardened. You don't understand, Lucas. You weren't there. You didn't see how he... I don't care how he made you feel, I snapped, cutting her off. You're an adult, Emily. You made your choices. Don't you dare try to blame this on him. She flinched, but I didn't stop. Do you think this changes anything? Do you think this makes what you did any less disgusting? You could have walked away at any time. You didn't. Her tears spilled over, but I felt nothing. I don't know what else to say, she whispered. I'm trying, Lucas. I'm trying to make this right. Right? I repeated, standing up. There's no making this right, Emily. You can twist the story however you want, but it doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me. And it sure as hell doesn't change the fact that this marriage is over. I grabbed the stack of papers and tossed them onto the table. If you want to blame Daniel, fine. Do it in therapy or in court, because I'm done listening to your excuses. As I turned to leave, she called out, "Lucas, wait." I paused in the doorway, not bothering to look back. "What?" Her voice cracked as she said, "I still love you. I know I messed up, but I love you." I closed my eyes, her words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. For a moment, I almost turned around. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the lies, and the moment passed. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing at the table. I didn't love her anymore. Not the way I used to. Whatever love we'd shared had been buried under the weight of her betrayal, and no amount of tears or excuses could bring it back. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. Emily wasn't just trying to salvage our marriage. She was trying to save her reputation. The carefully curated image she'd built for herself was crumbling, and she was desperate to control the narrative. But it didn't matter what story she told herself or anyone else. The truth was out there, and I was finally ready to face it. The next week brought a storm I wasn't fully prepared for. Word about Emily's affair started to trickle through our social circles. And soon, it wasn't just me who saw her differently. Friends, neighbors, even her co-workers began to notice cracks in her carefully polished image. She must have realized it too because she started to panic. One evening, she cornered me as I was coming in from work. "Lucas, we need to talk," she said, blocking the hallway. "I don't think there's much left to say," I replied, brushing past her. But she grabbed my arm, her grip tighter than I expected. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't let this ruin everything." I stopped, staring at her. "You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with Daniel." Her face twisted in frustration. "People are turning against me, Lucas. Do you know what that feels like? To walk into work and see them whispering? To have friends cancel plans without explanation?" I shrugged. "You're feeling a fraction of what I've been dealing with, Emily. Forgive me if I don't feel sorry for you." She let go of my arm, her hand dropping to her side. "This is your fault," she hissed suddenly. "You didn't have to tell anyone. You didn't have to make this public." I laughed, the sound bitter. "My fault? I didn't make this public, Emily. Your actions did. Don't blame me because people are finally seeing who you really are." Her eyes narrowed, her cheeks flushing with anger. "You're trying to punish me," she accused. "That's what this is about. You're not just ending the marriage. You're trying to destroy me." "You destroyed yourself," I shot back, my voice cold. "I didn't make you cheat. I didn't make you lie. You did that all on your own." She didn't have a response to that, and I didn't wait around for her to come up with one. I walked past her, heading upstairs, leaving her standing there, seething. Later that week, the fallout hit its peak. I got a call from one of Emily's co-workers, someone I barely knew but who clearly knew plenty about me. "Lucas, I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said hesitantly, "but I thought you should know. There are rumors going around about why you and Emily are separating." "What kind of rumors?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "She's telling people you were controlling," the woman said carefully. "That you didn't trust her and pushed her away. She's even implied that you might have cheated first." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Emily had always been manipulative in small, subtle ways, but this was something else entirely. "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally, my voice tight. "I'll handle it." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Anger coursed through me, hot and sharp. It wasn't enough for her to betray me. Now she was trying to rewrite the narrative, to make herself the victim and me the villain. That night, I confronted her. "Why are you telling people I cheated?" I demanded as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. She looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Emily," I snapped. "You're out there spreading lies, trying to make me look like the bad guy." Her face hardened, but she didn't deny it. "What do you expect me to do, Lucas? Let everyone think I'm a monster?" "I expect you to take responsibility for your actions," I said, my voice rising. "You cheated. You lied. You broke this marriage. Stop trying to pin this on me because you can't handle the consequences. She stood up, her jaw tight. You don't understand, Lucas. You don't know what it's like to have everyone turn against you. You're right, I said coldly. Because I've never given anyone a reason to. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt. But I didn't care. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I'm done protecting you, I said, grabbing my jacket. If you want to keep playing the victim, go ahead. But don't expect me to stand by and let you drag my name through the mud. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of relief. For so long, I'd let her control the narrative, let her excuses cloud the truth. But not anymore. I was done playing nice. It was time for Emily to face the full weight of what she'd done. The decision to finalize the divorce came with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, mostly. Sadness, definitely. But above all, clarity. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again, and I wasn't going to let Emily, or her lies, take that away. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer to put the final pieces in place. The evidence Ian had collected, the financial documents, everything was ready. All I had to do was hand over the papers, and we could officially start the process. It should have felt like a victory, but as I sat in my car outside the office, a nagging sense of failure crept in. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. When I got home that evening, Emily was waiting for me in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked tired. More tired than I'd ever seen her. Can we talk? She asked softly. I set my bag down and leaned against the counter. About what? She hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass. About us. About everything. There's nothing left to talk about, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've made my decision, Emily. This is over. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't waver. I couldn't. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I know I ruined everything. But I still love you, Lucas. Doesn't that mean anything? I stared at her, trying to find even a shred of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But all I saw was someone I no longer recognized. Someone who had betrayed me, lied to me, and shattered the trust we'd built. No, I said quietly. Not anymore. She flinched, the finality of my words sinking in. So that's it, she whispered. You're just going to walk away? I didn't walk away, Emily, I replied. You did. The moment you let him into your life, you left me. This isn't me giving up. This is me accepting reality. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she nodded, setting her glass down on the counter. I guess I deserve that, she said, her voice hollow. I didn't respond. Instead, I handed her the divorce papers I'd been carrying in my bag. You should look these over, I said. Sign them when you're ready. Her hands trembled as she took the papers, her eyes scanning the first page. I never thought it would end like this, she murmured. Neither did I said simply before walking away. Part 10. Rebuilding. The day Emily moved out felt surreal. Watching her pack up her things, her face pale and her eyes hollow, didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. It just felt empty. She paused at the door, one hand gripping the frame as she looked back at me. I hope one day you can forgive me, she said softly. I didn't answer. I didn't owe her that. After she left, the house felt unbearably quiet. At first, I hated it. I hated how empty the rooms felt, how every corner reminded me of what we'd lost. But over time, the silence became comforting. It was a blank slate, a chance to rebuild. I threw myself into work, into hobbies I'd neglected, into reconnecting with friends I'd drifted from. Slowly but surely, I began to find pieces of myself that I thought I'd lost. Months passed, and I started to feel like myself again. Stronger, more confident, and free of the weight that Emily had left behind. One evening, I found myself at a local art gallery, an event I'd been invited to by a coworker. I wasn't expecting much, but then I met Naomi. She was everything Emily wasn't: bold, honest, and unapologetically herself. She had a laugh that filled the room, a sharp wit that kept me on my toes, and a kindness that felt genuine. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I thought I'd never feel again: hope. Naomi and I took things slow, building a relationship rooted in trust and mutual respect. She knew about my past, about Emily, and she didn't shy away from it. Instead, she listened, offering support without pity. With her, I felt like I could finally move forward. Looking back, I realized Emily's betrayal had taught me something invaluable. My worth wasn't tied to someone else's actions. I'd been broken, yes, but I'd also rebuilt myself stronger than before. And as I sat with Naomi on a quiet Sunday morning, sipping coffee and planning our next adventure, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that was enough.